Grace Whitfield's fingers were blue when she clawed at Jonathan Hale's ranch door, her body shaking so violently she couldn't speak. The school teacher who'd taught Latin and philosophy was now begging with her eyes, her pride frozen somewhere 3 miles back on the road. Jonathan stared at her through the crack in the door, his face carved from the same stone as the Montana mountains behind him. "I need—" she tried, but her jaw locked. He didn't move to help. "You're the teacher they fired," he said, not a question. She nodded, tears turning to ice on her cheeks. "I have a proposition," he said, "but you won't like it." Before we continue Grace's story, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and stay with me until the very end to see how this journey unfolds. Please comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to that cold winter night in Montana. Charlie Brennan found her first, actually. The ranch foreman was riding back from checking the north fence line when he spotted what he thought was a dead animal in the snow. When he got closer and realized it was a woman, he nearly fell off his horse. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" Charlie dismounted, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. Grace's eyes fluttered open, but she couldn't form words. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her dark hair matted with ice. "Jesus Christ," Charlie muttered, pulling off his coat and wrapping it around her. "What in hell are you doing out here?" Grace tried to speak, but only a rasping sound came out. Charlie didn't wait for an answer. He lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, holding her upright as they rode toward the ranch house. She drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments, the rhythmic thud of hooves, the warmth of Charlie's chest against her back, the massive log structure rising out of the white landscape like a fortress. "Boss!" Charlie shouted as they approached. "Boss, we got a problem!" The door opened, and Jonathan Hale stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. His face was weathered, but handsome in a hard way, and his eyes were the color of flint. He looked at Grace with no particular expression, as if Charlie had brought him a stray calf instead of a dying woman. "Who is she?" Jonathan's voice was flat, controlled. "Don't know yet. Found her half frozen on the north road." Charlie was already carrying Grace up the steps. "She needs to get warm, fast." Jonathan stepped aside, letting them pass. Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly refined. Polished wood floors, a massive stone fireplace, leather furniture that looked expensive. Charlie laid Grace on the sofa near the fire, and a Mexican woman appeared from somewhere in the back, clucking her tongue. "Dios mío, pobrecita," the woman said, rushing to get blankets. "Señor Hale, we need hot water, quickly." "Thank you, Rosa." Jonathan's tone was courteous but distant. He stood near the fireplace, watching as Rosa and Charlie worked to warm Grace, but he didn't move to help. His hands stayed in his pockets. His face remained impassive. It took nearly an hour before Grace could speak. The color had returned to her face, though her hands still trembled as she held the cup of coffee Rosa had forced on her. She looked around the room, taking in her surroundings with the sharp, assessing gaze of someone who'd been educated beyond her circumstances. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry to impose." "You're the school teacher," Jonathan said. It wasn't a question. Grace stiffened. "I was." "Heard what happened. The town council voted you out after you sided with the miners' children about the textbook situation." Jonathan moved to pour himself a whiskey. "Foolish thing to do." "It was the right thing to do," Grace said, her chin lifting despite her exhaustion. "Those children deserve the same education as the banker's son." "Right doesn't keep you fed." Jonathan took a drink. "Or warm." "Clearly not," Grace set down her coffee cup. "But I didn't come here to debate philosophy with you, Mr. Hale. I came because I'm desperate, and I heard you were a man who understood transactions." Jonathan's eyebrow raised slightly. "Did you now? The foreman at the Mitchell Ranch told me you were looking for someone to care for your sons." Grace's hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady. "He said you'd been through 3 housekeepers in 6 months, and none of them could handle the boys." "Mitchell's foreman talks too much." "He talks enough." Grace leaned forward. "I need shelter and food. You need someone educated enough to teach your sons, and strong enough to manage them. It's a fair exchange." Charlie, who'd been standing by the door, cleared his throat. "Boss, I should—" "Stay," Jonathan said curtly. Then to Grace, "You know nothing about my situation. I know your wife died 2 years ago, giving birth to your second son. I know Eli is 7 and angry at the world, and Caleb is 2 and needs a mother more than he needs a hired woman. I know you run one of the largest cattle operations in 3 counties, and you're too proud to remarry for love, but practical enough to see the value in a marriage of convenience." Grace's dark eyes held his. "Did I miss anything?" The room was absolutely silent except for the crackling of the fire. Charlie looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Rosa had stopped moving entirely, frozen with a blanket in her hands. Jonathan studied Grace for a long moment. "You're bold, I'll give you that." "I'm educated, Mr. Hale. There's a difference." "And you think education makes you qualified to raise 2 boys on a cattle ranch?" Jonathan's voice had an edge now. "You think reading books prepares you for what happens when Eli throws a tantrum that lasts 3 hours? Or when Caleb wakes up screaming every night for a mother who's dead?" "No," Grace said quietly. "But having lost everything myself prepares me to understand their pain. And having nothing left to lose makes me willing to try." Jonathan set down his glass with a sharp click. "Charlie, go check on the horses." "Boss, now." Charlie left, though he clearly didn't want to. Rosa followed, muttering prayers in Spanish. When they were alone, Jonathan moved to stand in front of Grace, looking down at her with those cold, measuring eyes. "Here's how this would work," he said. "You'd marry me tomorrow, legal and binding. You'd take care of my sons, manage the household, and present yourself as their mother in public. In private, we'd maintain separate rooms and separate lives. You'd receive room and board and the small allowance for personal expenses. If you try to leave, you get nothing. If you mistreat my boys in any way, you get nothing, and I'll make sure you never work in Montana again." Grace's stomach churned, but she kept her face calm. "And what do you get?" "A mother for my sons who won't run off when things get difficult. Someone educated enough to teach them properly. Someone who understands this is a business arrangement and won't expect things I can't give." "Like affection?" "Like love," Jonathan said bluntly. "I loved my wife. She's dead. I won't pretend to feel something I don't." Grace stood, though her legs were still weak. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", and she looked Jonathan directly in the eye. "I accept your terms with one addition." "I'm not negotiating." "You will for this." Grace's voice was steel. "If I fulfill my duties as a mother and wife for 1 full year, and if at that time either of us wishes to end the arrangement, we'll divorce, and you'll provide me with enough money to start a new life elsewhere. Not a fortune, just enough for 6 months' expenses while I find work." "That's not—" "It's fair," Grace cut him off. "You're asking me to give up any chance at a real life, a real marriage, children of my own. You're asking me to raise your sons knowing I'll never truly be their mother in your eyes. The least you can do is guarantee I won't be trapped here forever if it doesn't work." Jonathan's jaw worked. She could see him calculating, weighing. "1 year," he finally said. "If after 1 year either of us wants out, you get 3 months' expenses, not 6. 4. 3. Final offer." Grace extended her hand. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Hale. He stared at her hand for a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. We'll go into town tomorrow morning. Judge Whitmore can marry us at 10 o'clock. Rosa will find you something appropriate to wear. I have my own dress. It's covered in ice and torn in 3 places. Jonathan moved toward the door. Rosa will help you. I'll have Charlie bring your things from wherever you left them. There are no things, Grace said quietly. I left them in town when they evicted me from the schoolhouse. Jonathan stopped, his back to her. For a moment, she thought she saw his shoulders tense, but when he turned around, his face was as impassive as ever. I see. Well, Rosa will handle it. He opened the door, then paused. The boys don't know about this yet. I'll tell them in the morning. Wait, you're going to tell them the morning of the wedding? Better than giving Eli time to plan ways to make you leave. Jonathan's smile was grim. Get some rest, Miss Whitfield. Tomorrow your life changes permanently. He left, and Grace sank back onto the sofa, her whole body trembling now that she was alone. What had she done? She'd agreed to marry a man who looked at her like she was a piece of livestock, to raise children who would hate her, to live in a house where she'd always be an outsider. But what choice did she have? The alternative was freezing to death on the Montana plains. Or worse, going back to town and begging the same people who'd destroyed her for scraps and pity. Rosa came back in, carrying an armload of fabric. Come, señorita. We make you beautiful for tomorrow, see? I don't need to be beautiful, Grace said tiredly. Just presentable. Every bride should be beautiful, Rosa said firmly, even if the groom is a fool. Grace almost smiled. You've been with the family a long time? Since Senor Hale was a baby. I watched him grow, watched him marry his sweet Margaret, watched him turn to stone when she died. Rosa's dark eyes were sad. He is not a bad man, just a broken one. And the boys? Eli is like his father, all anger, hiding all hurt. Caleb is like his mother, sweet and soft, but starting to build walls too. Rosa touched Grace's cheek gently. You will need a strong heart for this family, señorita. Strong and patient. I'm not sure I have either anymore. Then you will find them. Or make them. That is what we women do, no? Rosa smiled. Now come, let me show you to your room. Tomorrow is a big day. The bedroom Rosa led her to was spacious and feminine, with lace curtains and a 4-poster bed. This was Margaret's room, Rosa said, and Grace's stomach dropped. I can't. Senor Hale has not entered this room since she died. He will not mind. Rosa set the fabric on the bed. Besides, where else would you sleep? This is the mistress's room. Grace stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. The room smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Milk, maybe, or baby powder. There were still books on the nightstand, a hairbrush on the dresser. It felt like walking into a shrine. I'll sleep on the sofa downstairs, she said. Absolutely not. You will be the lady of this house tomorrow. You must start acting like it tonight. Rosa gently pushed her inside. Margaret would want someone to love her boys and care for her home. She was not a jealous woman. She would understand. Grace wasn't so sure about that, but she was too exhausted to argue. Rosa helped her out of her ruined dress and into a nightgown that was too big, probably one of Margaret's, and then left her alone. Grace climbed into the bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. This time tomorrow she'd be married to a man who felt nothing for her, to children who would resent her, in a house haunted by the ghost of a woman she could never replace. The panic rose in her chest, sharp and suffocating, and she had to grip the sheets to keep from running out of the room. But where would she run to? The town that had cast her out? The school that had dismissed her? The winter that would kill her before morning? No. She'd made her choice. She'd survived this the same way she'd survived losing her parents to cholera, losing her position, losing her home. She'd survived because she had no other option. Grace pulled the blankets up to her chin and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd be Mrs. Jonathan Hale. God help her. Morning came too fast. Rosa woke her at dawn with coffee and bread, chattering about the dress she'd altered overnight. Grace ate mechanically, not tasting anything, and let Rosa fuss over her hair and face. The dress was simple but elegant. Deep blue wool with black trim, appropriate for a winter wedding or a funeral. Grace couldn't decide which this felt more like. "The boys are awake," Rosa said, pinning Grace's hair into a neat chignon. "Senor Hale is telling them now." Grace's hands clenched in her lap. "How do you think they'll react?" "Eli will be angry. Caleb will be confused." Rosa's face was sympathetic. "But children are stronger than we think, and smarter. They will come to love you, given time." "Will they?" Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "See, if you let them." Downstairs, she could hear raised voices, a child shouting, "No, no, I don't want a new mother," and then something crashing. Grace flinched. "Eli," Rosa said calmly, "right on schedule." "Should I?" "No, let Senor Hale handle this. You will have plenty of time to deal with Eli's temper." Rosa stood back, surveying her work. "There, you look very beautiful." Grace looked at herself in the small mirror. She did look different. Older, somehow. More severe. Like a woman who could survive anything because she already had. "It's time," Rosa said. "The wagon is ready." The ride into town was silent and awkward. Jonathan sat beside her on the wagon bench, handling the reins with practiced ease, while Charlie rode ahead on horseback. In the back, Eli stared at Grace with open hostility, his small face twisted with rage. Caleb sat on Rosa's lap, too young to understand what was happening, just knowing that everyone was upset. "You can't make me like her," Eli said suddenly, his voice loud in the cold air. "I'm not asking you to like her," Jonathan said, without turning around. "I'm asking you to respect her." "Why should I? She's not my mother. My mother is dead." "Eli, I hate you!" The boy's voice cracked. "I hate you for doing this!" Jonathan's hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't respond. Grace wanted to say something, anything. But what could she say? That she understood? That it would be okay? Both would be lies. They reached town at 9:30. The courthouse was a squat brick building at the end of Main Street, and Judge Whitmore was waiting on the steps, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, nodding curtly. "Miss Whitfield, shall we get this done?" The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. Grace stood beside Jonathan in the judge's musty office, repeated words she didn't feel, and accepted a ring that was too tight on her finger. Margaret's ring, she realized with a jolt. When Judge Whitmore pronounced them man and wife, Jonathan didn't kiss her. He just nodded once, signed the papers, and turned to leave. "Wait," Grace said. He paused, looking back at her with impatience. "I need to know one thing," she said. "Do you regret this already?" Jonathan's eyes were unreadable. "I don't regret things that are necessary, Mrs. Hale, and neither should you." Then he walked out, and Grace stood there in a dead woman's dress, wearing a dead woman's ring, bound to a man who felt nothing and children who hated her. But she was alive. She was warm. She was fed. It would have to be enough. The ride back to the ranch was worse than the ride into town. Eli sat in the wagon bed with his arms crossed, staring at Grace's back like he could set her on fire with his eyes alone. Caleb had fallen asleep against Rosa, his small face peaceful in a way that made Grace's chest ache. Jonathan didn't speak. His silence was heavier than words, pressing down on Grace until she felt like she couldn't breathe. When they pulled up to the house, Eli jumped out before the wagon fully stopped and ran inside, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Jonathan didn't go after him. "Give him time," Rosa said quietly, gathering Caleb into her arms. "He will come around." "Will he?" Grace climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the cold, because it seems like I just became the enemy of a 7-year-old boy who's very good at holding grudges. "He gets that from his father," Rosa said, and there was the slightest hint of reproach in her voice as she glanced at Jonathan. Jonathan ignored the comment. "Charlie will bring your trunk to Margaret's room, to your room. Rosa will show you where everything is. Dinner is at 6. The boys eat at 5:30. He started to walk away, then stopped. "And Mrs. Hale?" "The boys call me Pa. You can decide what they call you, but don't force it." Then he was gone, striding toward the barns like he couldn't get away fast enough. Grace stood in the cold, watching her husband disappear. "Well," she said to no one in particular, "this is off to a wonderful start." Inside, the house felt different now. It wasn't just a warm place anymore. It was her home. Or it was supposed to be. Grace walked through the rooms slowly, trying to memorize where things were, trying to feel like she belonged here. The parlor, with its leather furniture and hunting trophies. The dining room, with a long table that could seat 12. The kitchen, where Rosa was already starting dinner preparations, Caleb playing at her feet with wooden blocks. "Where's Eli?" Grace asked. "His room, upstairs, second door on the right." Rosa didn't look up from chopping vegetables. "I would leave him alone for now." "I can't leave him alone forever." "No, but you can leave him alone for an hour." Rosa finally met her eyes. "You are very brave or very foolish, Senora. I have not decided which." "Can't I be both?" Rosa smiled slightly. "See, that would explain much." Grace went upstairs, moving past Eli's door, where she could hear things being thrown around, and entered what was now her bedroom. Someone had brought up her small trunk, the one thing she'd managed to retrieve from town, and set it at the foot of the bed. Grace opened it slowly. 3 dresses, all worn, 2 pairs of shoes, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible, and at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, her teaching certificates from the Women's Academy in Boston. She sat on the bed holding those certificates, remembering the girl she'd been when she earned them. Ambitious, idealistic, certain she could change the world through education. That girl seemed like a stranger now. "What are you doing in my mama's room?" Grace looked up sharply. Eli stood in the doorway, his face blotchy from crying, but his expression hard as iron. "It's my room now," Grace said gently. "Your father gave it to me." "He had no right!" Eli's voice cracked. "This is Mama's room. Her things are still here. Her smell is still here. You can't just take it." "I'm not taking anything from your mother, Eli. I could never." "You took my pa." The boy was shaking now, his fists clenched at his sides. "You made him marry you, and now you're going to make him forget her." Grace stood, moving slowly so she wouldn't spook him. "Eli, listen to me. I will never replace your mother. I'm not trying to. I know you loved her." "You don't know anything." Eli grabbed a vase from the dresser, one of Margaret's probably, and threw it at the wall. It shattered, and Grace flinched, but didn't move toward him. "You don't know what it was like. You don't know how she used to sing to me, or how she smelled like roses, or how she promised she'd never leave, and then she did." The boy collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Grace's instinct was to go to him, to hold him, but she knew he'd push her away. So she did something else. She sat down on the floor too, a few feet away from him, and waited. "My mother died when I was 14, she said quietly. Cholera. It took her in 3 days. She was strong and healthy on Monday, and by Thursday, she was gone. My father followed her 6 months later. Same sickness." Eli's sobbing quieted slightly. He didn't look at her, but she knew he was listening. "I was alone after that," Grace continued. "No brothers or sisters, no aunts or uncles who wanted to take in an orphan girl. So I learned to survive on my own. I became a teacher because it was the only respectable work I could find. And I was good at it. Really good. I loved those children, even the difficult ones. Especially the difficult ones." "I'm not difficult," Eli muttered. "No, you're heartbroken. There's a difference." Grace pulled her knees to her chest. "Your mother loved you very much. I can tell by the way you talk about her. And you're right, I'll never be her. I'll never sing the same songs, or smell like roses, or make you feel the way she did. But I can try to take care of you the way I think she would have wanted, if you'll let me." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What if I don't let you?" "Then my life will be very difficult, and so will yours." Grace managed a small smile. "But we'll both survive. We're good at that, it seems." The boy finally looked at her, his eyes red and swollen. "Pa said you were smart. He said that's why he picked you." "Did he?" "He said you went to a fancy school back east. He said you could teach us things the other housekeepers couldn't." Eli wiped his nose on his sleeve. "But he also said you needed us as much as we needed you. He said you had nowhere else to go." The honesty of it stung, but Grace nodded. "That's true. I was desperate. Your father offered me shelter, and I took it. But that doesn't mean I'll do a bad job taking care of you. I might not be your mother, Eli, but I can be someone who looks out for you. Someone who teaches you. Someone who stays." "Everyone says they'll stay," Eli said bitterly. "Then they die or leave." "I'm not planning on either. Mama didn't plan on dying." Grace had no answer for that. The boy was right, and they both knew it. She stood, brushing off her skirt. "I need to clean up this glass before someone gets hurt. Why don't you go wash your face? Dinner will be ready soon." Eli stood too, but slowly. "Are you going to tell Pa I broke Mama's vase?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you're grieving, and grief makes us do things we regret." Grace found a cloth and started picking up the larger pieces of broken porcelain. "But Eli, next time you want to throw something, make it something that isn't precious. There's a box of old jars in the kitchen. Those will break just as satisfyingly." The corner of Eli's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Then he left, and Grace finished cleaning up the mess, her hands shaking. Dinner was a tense affair. Grace sat at the long table, with Jonathan at one end, her at the other, and miles of polished wood between them. Eli picked at his food and wouldn't look at her. Caleb, who'd eaten earlier with Rosa, sat on Jonathan's lap, playing with a wooden horse. "How was your afternoon?" Jonathan asked, and it took Grace a moment to realize he was talking to her. "Educational," she said carefully. "Eli didn't give you too much trouble?" Grace glanced at the boy, who was staring at his plate with fierce concentration. "Nothing I couldn't handle." "Broke one of Margaret's vases," Eli said suddenly, his voice defiant. "Threw it at the wall." Grace's heart sank. So much for their tentative truce. Jonathan set down his fork slowly. "Did he now?" "It was an accident," Grace said quickly. "No, it wasn't," Eli said. "I did it on purpose. Because I'm angry, and I don't want her here, and I don't care if Pa punishes me." The room went silent. Caleb stopped playing with his horse. Rosa, serving from the kitchen doorway, froze mid-step. Jonathan looked at his son for a long moment. Then he said, "Go to your room." "But," Now! Eli shoved back from the table and ran upstairs. Grace heard his door slam, then the muffled sound of crying. She wanted to go after him, but Jonathan's voice stopped her. Let him be. He's a child. He's hurting. I know what he is. Jonathan's voice was cold. And I know he needs to learn that breaking things when you're angry isn't acceptable. He needs his father, Grace said, her own temper flaring, not a judge. He has a father, one who knows discipline is part of love. Discipline without comfort is just cruelty. Jonathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't presume to tell me how to raise my son, Mrs. Hale. You've been here less than a day. And in that day, I've shown more concern for his emotional state than you have. You know nothing about... Jonathan stopped, visibly controlling himself. This conversation is over. I have work to do in the office. He left, taking Caleb with him. Grace sat alone at the table, her appetite completely gone. Rosa came over and began clearing the plates. That went well, Grace said bitterly. He is afraid, Rosa said. Of what? Me? Of caring again. Of opening his heart to someone new and having it destroyed. Rosa touched Grace's shoulder gently. You threatened him just now, Signora. Not with your words, but with your caring. He sees that you already love those boys more than some of the housekeepers who lasted months. That terrifies him. Why? Because if you love them, he might start to love you. And he has decided love is too dangerous to risk. Grace put her head in her hands. Rosa, I don't know if I can do this. You can. You will. The older woman's voice was firm. Now go upstairs and check on Eli. He is probably crying himself sick. Grace found Eli curled up on his bed, his face buried in his pillow. She sat down beside him carefully, not touching him, just being present. I hate him, Eli said, his voice muffled. No, you don't. I do. He didn't even care that I broke Mama's vase. He just sent me away like I don't matter. He cares, Grace said quietly. He just doesn't know how to show it anymore. Eli rolled over, looking at her with those red-rimmed eyes. Did your pa send you away when you were sad? My father held me when my mother died. He let me cry for hours. Then he died too, and there was no one left to hold me. Grace smoothed the blanket absently. So I learned to hold myself together, just like your father did. Is that why he's so mean? He's not mean, Eli. He's broken. And broken people sometimes push away the things that might heal them, because healing hurts worse than staying broken. The boy considered this. Are you broken too? Yes. Then why aren't you mean? Grace smiled sadly. Because I decided a long time ago that being broken doesn't have to mean being cruel. It can also mean being kind, because you know what pain feels like. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Will you teach me something? Like what? Something Mama would have wanted me to know. Grace's throat tightened. I'll teach you whatever you want to learn. Teach me to read better. Mama was teaching me, but then He trailed off. Then we'll start tomorrow, Grace said, right after breakfast. Promise? I promise. Eli reached out slowly and took her hand. His grip was tentative, testing, ready to pull away at any moment. Grace held very still, afraid to breathe. You can't replace her, Eli said. I know. But maybe you can be something else, something new. I'd like that. Eli nodded once, then released her hand and rolled over to face the wall. Good night, Miss Grace. Not Ma or Mother. Miss Grace. It was something. Grace left his room feeling lighter than she had all day. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Jonathan, who was standing in the shadows. How long have you been there? She asked. Long enough. His face was unreadable. You're good with him. I told you I was a teacher. Teaching and mothering aren't the same thing. No, Grace agreed, but they both require patience, consistency, and the ability to see past the behavior to the hurt underneath. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. Margaret used to say something similar. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly to her. Grace didn't know what to say, so she just waited. She believed children needed to know they were loved unconditionally, that discipline without love was worthless. Jonathan's jaw worked. She was better at the love part than I am. Maybe you could learn. Maybe I'm too far gone for that. I don't believe that, Grace said. Broken things can be fixed, even people. Speaking from experience? Trying to. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then, surprising her, he said, "Thank you. For today. For not running when Eli threw that vase. For not demanding I coddle him. For—" He paused. "For trying." "You're welcome." They stood in the dim hallway, and for a moment, Grace thought she saw something in his eyes. Something warm, almost vulnerable. But then it was gone, replaced by that familiar coldness. "Good night, Mrs. Hale." "Good night, Mr. Hale." He walked away, and Grace returned to her room, to Margaret's room, and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the wind howled across the Montana plains, and somewhere in the house a child cried out in his sleep. Grace heard Jonathan's footsteps moving toward Caleb's room, heard his low voice soothing the boy back to sleep. Maybe he wasn't as broken as he thought. The next morning, Grace woke to sunlight streaming through the lace curtains and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. She dressed quickly, pinning her hair back in a simple style, and went downstairs to find Rosa already cooking breakfast and both boys sitting at the kitchen table. "Good morning," Grace said. "Morning, Miss Grace," Eli said, and Caleb looked up from his oatmeal with curious eyes. "Mama?" the toddler said, pointing at her. Grace's heart seized. "No, sweetheart, I'm Grace." "He calls every woman Mama," Eli said matter-of-factly. "He doesn't remember our real Mama. He was too little." The sadness of that statement hung in the air. Caleb went back to eating, oblivious, while Eli watched Grace carefully. "Where's your father?" Grace asked. "Out with the hands already. He leaves before dawn most days." Eli pushed his eggs around his plate. "Are we still doing lessons today?" "Absolutely, right after you finish breakfast." They set up in the parlor, Grace pulling out the few books she'd brought from her trunk. Eli was reading at about a 4th grade level. Not bad for 7, but not where he should be either. Grace started him on a passage from Robinson Crusoe, listening as he struggled through the longer words. "Sound it out," she encouraged. "Break it into pieces." "Marooned," Eli said slowly. "Marooned. Excellent. And what do you think that means?" "Stuck somewhere you can't leave?" "Exactly right," Grace smiled. "You are very clever, Eli." The boy's face flushed with pleasure. "Mama used to say that too." They worked for 2 hours straight, and Grace was amazed at how quickly Eli absorbed new information when he was engaged. He asked questions constantly, his mind sharp and curious beneath all that anger. When they finally took a break, Caleb toddled over with a picture book, holding it up to Grace. "Story!" he demanded. Grace lifted him onto her lap, ignoring the way her heart clenched, and began reading. Caleb leaned against her chest, his thumb in his mouth, and Eli scooted closer to listen too. For a moment, they were just a mother and her children, reading together on a winter morning. Then the front door opened, and Jonathan walked in, covered in snow and exhaustion. He stopped when he saw them, his face going carefully blank. "Pa!" Caleb scrambled down and ran to him. Jonathan lifted his son, but his eyes stayed on Grace. "Lessons going well?"
"Very well," Grace said, standing. "Eli's remarkably bright."
"Takes after his mother." Jonathan set Caleb down. "I need to speak with you. In private." Grace's stomach dropped.
"Of course."
They went into his office, a book-lined room that smelled of leather and tobacco. Jonathan closed the door and turned to face her, his expression serious. "There's something you need to know," he said, "about why I really needed someone to marry me so quickly." Grace waited, her heart pounding. "There's been trouble with cattle rustlers in the area. 3 ranches hit in the last month. They're organized, well-armed, and they're getting bolder." Jonathan moved to the window, looking out at his land. "I needed someone here who could protect the boys if something happened to me. Someone smart enough to hide them, brave enough to stay. You could have just hired a governess." "A governess can leave. A wife is bound by law and social pressure. You can't just walk away without consequences." He looked at her directly. "I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed to know my sons would be safe."
"You used me."
"Yes." At least he was honest. Grace moved to stand beside him at the window.
"Do you think they'll come here?"
"I think it's only a matter of time. We have one of the largest herds in 3 counties. We're a target." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Which is why you need to know what to do if it happens. There's a hidden room off the boys' bedroom, behind the bookshelf. If you hear gunfire, you take them there, and you don't come out until either I come for you or Charlie does. Understood?"
"You want me to hide while you fight?"
"I want you to protect my children. That's your job now." Grace wanted to argue, but she knew he was right.
"Understood."
"Good." Jonathan started to leave, then paused. "And Grace? Thank you for this morning. The boys seemed happy. That's more than I've managed in 2 years." He left before she could respond, and Grace stood alone in his office, trying to process everything. She'd married a man who saw her as a shield for his children, a strategic move in a dangerous game. But somehow, despite the coldness of the arrangement, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where something warmer seemed to break through. That night at dinner, the conversation was less strained. Eli told his father about the lessons, and Jonathan actually listened, asking questions. Caleb made a mess with his food, and Grace cleaned him up without thinking. And Jonathan watched her do it, with something in his eyes she couldn't name. After the boys were in bed, Grace found Jonathan sitting on the front porch in the freezing cold, staring out at the dark horizon.
"You'll catch your death out here," she said.
"Can't sleep anyway." Grace sat down beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter.
"Thinking about the rustlers?"
"Among other things." They sat in silence for a while. Then Grace said,
"Your wife must have been remarkable, to inspire such loyalty, even after death."
Jonathan's hands clenched. "She was everything good I'm not. Patient, kind. She saw the best in everyone."
"She chose you. That says something."
"She chose the man I was before she died. I'm not him anymore."
"No," Grace agreed quietly. "You're the man her death made you. But that doesn't mean you have to stay that way forever."
Jonathan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since their wedding. "You're not what I expected."
"What did you expect?"
"Someone more defeated. Someone grateful enough to be meek." Grace laughed, the sound sharp in the cold air. "You clearly don't know much about women who've survived on their own, Mr. Hale." "Jonathan," he said suddenly, "if we're going to do this, raise these boys together, run this household, you should call me Jonathan." "Jonathan," Grace repeated, testing the name. "And you can call me Grace, when it's just us." "Grace." He said it slowly, like he was learning a new language. "It suits you." "Why?" "Because despite everything, being orphaned, dismissed, forced into this arrangement, You still have grace. In the old sense, dignity, strength that looks like gentleness, but isn't. It was the kindest thing he'd said to her. Grace felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat together in the cold, two broken people, trying to figure out how to be whole. And for the first time since her wedding day, Grace felt something like hope stir in her chest. Maybe it was the cold that finally drove them inside, or maybe it was the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Either way, when Grace stood and brushed the snow from her skirt, Jonathan stood too, and they walked into the house together, without another word. The peace lasted exactly 4 days. Grace fell into a rhythm with the boys that felt almost natural. Mornings were for lessons. Eli was already reading 2 grades above his level, and even Caleb could recognize a few letters. Afternoons were for practical things, helping Rosa with bread making, teaching the boys to count using dried beans, reading aloud from adventure stories while the winter wind howled outside. Evenings were tense but manageable, with Jonathan joining them for dinner and occasionally staying to listen to Grace read to the boys before bed. It was almost like being a real family. Almost. Then Charlie came running into the house on a Wednesday afternoon, his face pale and his breath coming in gasps.
"Boss, they hit the Morrison place last night. Took 100 head and burned the barn. Shot Morrison's foreman when he tried to stop them."
Jonathan was on his feet instantly. "Is he dead?"
"No, but close. They left him bleeding in the snow as a warning."
Charlie's hands were shaking.
"Morrison said there were at least 8 of them, all armed with repeating rifles. They knew exactly where the herd was penned, knew which hands were on watch. Someone's feeding them information."
Grace felt her blood run cold. She looked at Eli, who'd gone very still in his chair, his book forgotten. Caleb was playing on the floor, oblivious. "We need to move the main herd," Jonathan said. "Split them up. Scatter them across the winter pastures. Make it harder to take them all at once." "Already started, boss. But that's not the only problem." Charlie glanced at Grace, then back to Jonathan. "Morrison said one of them asked about your place specifically. Asked if you'd remarried. Asked about the boys." The room went absolutely silent. "They know about my family?" Jonathan's voice was deadly quiet. "Sounds like it. Morrison thought maybe they were trying to figure out if you had extra hands here, or if—" Charlie trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence in front of the children. "Or if I had vulnerabilities they could exploit," Jonathan finished grimly. He looked at Grace. "Take the boys upstairs. Now."
"Jonathan!"
"Now, Grace." She didn't argue. "Come on, boys. Let's go work on that arithmetic problem you were struggling with."
"But I want to hear—"
Eli started. "Upstairs," Grace said firmly, taking Caleb's hand. "Your father will tell us what we need to know when he's ready." She got them to Eli's room and tried to keep them occupied, but her hands were shaking as she wrote out math problems. Caleb sensed her fear and became clingy, refusing to leave her lap. Eli kept looking toward the door, his jaw set in a way that reminded her painfully of Jonathan.
"Are we in danger?"
the boy asked finally. Grace considered lying, then decided against it. "Your father thinks we might be, but he's going to protect us."
"What if he can't?"
"Then I will." Eli's eyes widened.
"You? But you're just a what? A woman?"
Grace's voice was sharp. "I survived on my own for years before coming here, Eli. I'm stronger than I look."
"Do you know how to shoot?"
"No," Grace admitted. "But I know how to think, and I know how to keep you and your brother safe. That's more important than bullets." Eli seemed to consider this. Then he went to his closet and pulled out a wooden box. Inside was a small pistol, too small for a man, but perfect for a child. Or a woman. "This was Mama's,"
he said quietly. Pa gave it to her after some drifter came around asking questions when I was little. She kept it hidden, but she showed me once. She said a smart woman always has protection, even if she never has to use it. Grace stared at the gun. Your father knows you have this? No. I took it from her room after she died. I was going to give it back, but then I wanted to keep something of hers that wasn't just a dress or a book. Eli held it out to her. But you should have it now, in case. Eli, I can't. Please. The boy's eyes were desperate. I can't protect Caleb if something happens, but maybe you can. Grace took the pistol with trembling hands. It was heavier than she expected, cold and terrifying. I don't know how to use it. There's bullets in the box, and Pa says you just point and pull the trigger. Don't think too much about it. Eli's voice cracked. Promise me you'll use it if you have to. Promise me you won't let them hurt Caleb. I promise. She hid the pistol in her apron pocket, just as Jonathan's footsteps sounded on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. We're doubling the night watch, he said without preamble. Charlie's bringing in hands from the north pasture. I want everyone who can hold a rifle close to the house. How bad is it? Grace asked. Jonathan glanced at the boys, clearly debating how much to say. Bad enough that I need you to know the plan. If you hear gunfire, any gunfire, you take the boys to the hidden room. I showed you where it is. I remember. There's food in there, water, blankets. Enough for 2 days if you need it. You stay there until someone comes for you. Not just anyone, me, Charlie, or Rosa. Nobody else. You understand? Yes. Grace. Jonathan's voice was intense. I mean it. Even if you hear someone calling your name, even if it sounds like me, you don't open that door unless you're absolutely certain. These men are smart. They'll use every trick they can. Grace felt Eli's hand slip into hers. We understand, she said. Jonathan nodded, then did something unexpected. He crossed the room and pulled Eli into a rough hug, then kissed Caleb's head. You boys mind Grace. Whatever she tells you to do, you do it. No arguments, no questions. Agreed? Yes, Pa, Eli whispered. Jonathan straightened, and for a moment his eyes met Grace's over the children's heads. In that look she saw fear. Raw, undisguised fear. And something else. Trust, maybe. Or hope. I'll keep them safe, she said. I know you will. He touched her shoulder briefly, then was gone. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She lay in Margaret's bed listening to every sound. The wind, the creak of the house settling, boots on the porch as the hands changed watch. The pistol was under her pillow, loaded now, and the knowledge of it made her skin crawl. She'd never imagined herself capable of shooting another human being. She still wasn't sure she was. But for those boys sleeping down the hall, she thought she might be capable of anything. 2 more days passed in tense anticipation. The hands were jumpy, shooting at shadows. Jonathan barely slept, spending nights patrolling the property with Charlie. Grace kept the boys close, continuing their lessons, but always with one ear listening for trouble. It came on a Friday night, just after 9 o'clock. Grace was in the parlor, reading to Eli, while Caleb dozed in her lap. Jonathan was in his office, going over accounts, and Rosa was in the kitchen, preparing bread for morning. The fire crackled peacefully, and for a moment, Grace let herself relax. Let herself imagine this was her real life, her real family. Then the first gunshot shattered the window behind her. Down! Grace dove for the floor, shielding Caleb with her body. Eli scrambled beside her, his eyes wild with terror.
Glass rained down around them, and outside she could hear shouting, more gunfire, the thunder of horses. Jonathan burst from his office, rifle in hand. "Get them to the room, now!" Grace didn't hesitate. She grabbed Caleb and hauled Eli to his feet, running for the stairs. Behind her, she heard Jonathan barricading the door, heard Charlie shouting orders to the hands. More gunfire erupted, so loud it made her ears ring. "Mama!" Caleb was screaming, his little hands clutching her dress. "Mama, I'm scared!" She didn't correct him. She just ran. Eli's room was chaos. She could hear bullets hitting the outside wall, could smell smoke. Grace went straight to the bookshelf and pulled it open, revealing the narrow doorway behind. The hidden room was small and dark, barely 6 feet square, but it was safe. She pushed the boys inside. "Stay here," she ordered. "Don't make a sound. Don't open this door for anyone but me or your father." "You're coming too, right?" Eli's voice was shaking. "Miss Grace, you have to come too." "I will. I just need to make sure the door is locked." She pressed the pistol into Eli's hand. "If anyone who isn't family tries to come through that door, you use this. You hear me? You protect your brother." "No, you can't." But Grace was already closing the bookshelf, her heart breaking at the terror on Eli's face. She had to help. She couldn't hide while Jonathan and the hands fought for their lives. Grace ran back downstairs, her mind racing. What could she do? She wasn't a fighter. She couldn't shoot. But she could think. In the kitchen, she found Rosa stuffing cloth into bottles of cooking oil. "What are you doing?" Grace gasped. "Making firebombs. If they get too close to the house, we burn them out." Rosa's face was grim. "Can you light these?" Yes, I can do that." They worked frantically, preparing 6 bottles. Through the window, Grace could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, could hear men screaming. One of the barns was already burning, lighting the night with terrible orange light. "There!" Rosa pointed. 3 men were running toward the back of the house, using the smoke as cover. Grace didn't think. She grabbed a bottle, lit the cloth with shaking hands, and threw it through the broken window. It exploded in a burst of flame, and the men scattered, cursing. She lit another, then another, creating a wall of fire that forced them back. "Good girl!" Rosa was already loading Jonathan's spare rifle. "You keep throwing. I'll shoot anyone who gets through." It was the longest 10 minutes of Grace's life. She threw bottle after bottle, her hands blistered and bleeding from the heat. Rosa fired methodically, her old eyes sharp, her hands steady. Together, they held the back of the house. Then Grace heard it, a cry of pain from the front. Jonathan's voice. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." She ran toward the front of the house, her heart in her throat. Through the smoke, she saw Jonathan on the ground, blood spreading across his shirt, and Charlie standing over him, fighting off 2 attackers. Without thinking, Grace grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace and swung it at the nearest man's head. It connected with a sickening crack, and he went down. "Grace, get back!" Charlie shouted. But she was already dragging Jonathan toward the house. He was heavy, so heavy, and the blood was everywhere. Grace's hand slipped on it as she pulled him across the threshold. A bullet whined past her ear, so close she felt the heat of it. "Inside!" Charlie was right behind her, laying down covering fire. "Get him inside and barricade the door!" Grace did, her muscles screaming. She got Jonathan into the parlor and fell to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against the wound in his side. The blood was coming too fast, too much. "Jonathan, stay with me. Look at me." She was crying now, tears mixing with the soot on her face. "You don't get to die. You hear me? Your boys need you. They need their father." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Grace?" "Yes, it's me. Stay awake."
Tell me about Margaret. Tell me about when you met her. She wore yellow at the county fair.
Jonathan's voice was weak, fading.
I thought she was the sun. Walked right up to me and asked if I could dance. And could you? No, but I learned. For her.
His hand found Grace's, gripping weakly.
Just like I'm learning now. For you. Don't talk like that. You're not dying. I won't allow it.
Grace pressed harder on the wound, feeling his blood pulse between her fingers.
Rosa, I need bandages. Hot water. Now!
The fighting outside was dying down. Either the rustlers were retreating, or the hands were dead. Grace couldn't think about that. She focused on keeping Jonathan alive, on keeping pressure on the wound, on talking to him so he wouldn't slip away. I saw you with the boys, Jonathan mumbled. Saw you teaching Eli. Saw you with Caleb. You loved them. Of course I love them. And me? His eyes opened wider, suddenly clear. Do you love me, Grace? She froze. The question hung in the air between them. Impossible to answer. Impossible to ignore. I don't know, she whispered honestly. But I'm choosing you. Every day, I'm choosing this family, this life. Isn't that enough? More than enough. Jonathan's hand tightened on hers. More than I deserve. Rosa appeared with supplies, and together they worked to clean and bandage the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, missing anything vital by inches. Jonathan passed out from the pain, but his breathing steadied. His color improved. He was going to live. Grace sat back on her heels, covered in blood and soot and exhaustion, and started laughing. It was a wild, half-hysterical sound, but she couldn't stop it. Signora? Rosa looked concerned. Are you all right? I just attacked armed men with fire and a poker, Grace said. I pulled my husband out of a gunfight. I think I'm losing my mind. No, Rosa smiled slightly. You are just becoming a rancher's wife. This is how we survive. Charlie appeared in the doorway, his face grim. They're gone. Lost 2 hands, Jenkins and young Tommy. 3 more wounded. We got 5 of them, killed 2, the rest ran off. He looked at Jonathan. How bad is he? He'll live, Grace said, but he needs rest. Weeks of it. Can't rest. We need to. You need to do nothing except heal, Grace cut him off. Charlie, you're in charge of the ranch until Jonathan's back on his feet. I'll manage the house and the boys. We'll make this work. Charlie hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. After he left, Grace went upstairs to get the boys. Her whole body was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving her weak and sick. She opened the bookshelf to find Eli pointing the pistol directly at her face. It's me, she said gently. It's Grace. You can put that down now. Eli lowered the gun slowly, then burst into tears. Caleb was crying too, hiccuping sobs that shook his little body. Grace gathered them both into her arms and sank to the floor, holding them while they wept. Is Pa dead? Eli asked. No, he's hurt, but he's alive. He's downstairs. Can we see him? Tomorrow. Right now he needs to sleep. Grace kissed both their heads. You were so brave, both of you. Your father would be so proud. I was scared, Eli admitted. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do the right thing anyway. Grace stood, lifting Caleb. Come on, let's get you both cleaned up and into bed. She tucked them into Eli's bed together. They needed each other tonight, and sang them the only lullaby she remembered from her own childhood. When they finally fell asleep, She went downstairs to check on Jonathan. He was awake, barely. "The boys?" "Safe. Asleep." Grace sat beside the sofa where they'd moved him. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You saved my life." "You would have done the same." "I thought I married you to protect my sons. Turns out, you're the one protecting all of us." Jonathan reached for her hand. "Grace, I need to tell you something. About Margaret." "You don't have to." "I do." He took a shaky breath. "I loved her. God, I loved her so much it felt like breathing. And when she died, part of me died too. I thought I'd never feel anything again except anger and grief. I didn't want to feel anything else. It was easier that way." Grace waited, her heart pounding. "But you," Jonathan continued, his voice rough with emotion, "you came into my house with your pride and your education and your fierce heart, and you made me feel again, made me hope again, and that terrified me more than any rustler ever could. Jonathan, I'm not asking you to love me. I know this started as a transaction, and you have every right to keep it that way. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as the teacher I hired, and started seeing you as my wife, my partner, he struggled for the word, my future." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know if I love you, not the way you loved Margaret. But when I saw you bleeding tonight, I felt something break open inside me, something that's been closed off for years." She squeezed his hand. "Maybe it's not love yet, but it's the beginning of something. If you'll be patient with me." "I've got nothing but time now. Doctor's orders." Jonathan managed a weak smile. "And a wife who's apparently part wildcat." "Firebombs, Grace? Really?" "Rose's idea. I just threw them. You were magnificent." His eyes were heavy, but he fought to stay awake. "Don't leave. Please, just stay here." "I'm not going anywhere." Grace pulled a chair close and held his hand while he slept. Outside, dawn was breaking over the Montana plains, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of pink and gold. The ranch was damaged, but not destroyed. The family was shaken, but alive. And Grace, for the first time since her wedding day, felt like she truly belonged here. Not as a hired mother, not as a transaction, but as something real. She dozed in that chair, waking every time Jonathan stirred, checking his bandages, forcing water down his throat when he could swallow. By the time full morning came, Rosa had arrived with fresh coffee and the news that the boys were still asleep. "Let them rest," Grace said quietly. "They've earned it." "So have you, Senora." Rosa looked at her critically. "When did you last sleep? Really sleep?" "I'll sleep when he's stable." Stubborn. But Rosa's eyes were warm. Just like Margaret. Grace's head snapped up. "What?" Margaret was the same. When Senor Hale had pneumonia 5 years ago, she sat beside him for 3 days straight. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. Just watched him, like if she looked away, he might disappear. Rosa touched Grace's shoulder. She would be glad he has someone who cares like that again. "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know, but you are loving her family. That is enough." The doctor arrived at mid-morning, a gruff man named Patterson, who'd seen his share of gunshot wounds. He examined Jonathan thoroughly while Grace stood by, her stomach churning. "Clean wound, good stitching," Patterson said finally. "Who did this?" "I did," Grace said, "with Rosa's help." Patterson's eyebrows rose. "You've done this before?" "No, but I'm a quick learner." "Clearly." He repacked his bag. Keep it clean, change the dressing twice daily. No riding, no heavy lifting for at least 4 weeks. He'll be weak as a kitten for a while, but he should make a full recovery. Patterson looked at her directly. You saved his life, Mrs. Hale. Another hour bleeding like that, and we'd be planning a funeral. After he left, Grace finally allowed herself to break down. She went to Margaret's room, her room, and wept into the pillow, great shaking sobs that she'd been holding back for hours. Fear, relief, exhaustion, all of it came pouring out until she was empty. She woke hours later to find Eli sitting beside the bed, watching her. You were crying in your sleep, he said. Grace sat up, wiping her face. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you. I cry in my sleep too, since Mama died. Eli's voice was matter-of-fact. Pa says it's because our hearts hurt too much during the day, so they save some pain for nighttime. That's actually very wise. Is your heart hurting? Grace considered lying, then didn't. Yes, but it's also healing. Sometimes healing hurts worse than staying broken. Eli nodded, like this made perfect sense. Pa's asking for you. He woke up a little while ago and wanted to know where you were. Grace stood quickly, smoothing her rumpled dress. How is he? Grumpy. Says he's fine and wants to get up. Charlie told him to stay put, or you'd throw more firebombs at him. Despite everything, Grace smiled. Charlie's a smart man. She found Jonathan propped up on pillows, looking pale but determined. Charlie was standing over him with crossed arms, clearly having won the argument about staying in bed. There she is, Jonathan said when he saw her. Tell Charlie I'm perfectly capable of checking the fences. You're perfectly capable of tearing your stitches and bleeding to death, Grace said. Stay in that bed or I'll tie you to it. Charlie grinned. Told you, boss. Traitors, both of you. But Jonathan's eyes were soft on Grace. How are the boys? Shaken, but resilient. Caleb's been asking for you. Eli's... She hesitated. Eli's been hovering around me like he's afraid I'll disappear. Smart boy. Knows a treasure when he sees one. Jonathan shifted, wincing. Grace, we need to talk about what happened. About what you did. I did what anyone would have. No. You did what a warrior would have done. What a mother would have done. Jonathan's voice was fierce. You defended this home like it was yours to defend. You defended my boys like they were yours to protect. You defended me like I was yours to save. You are mine to save, Grace said quietly. That's what marriage means, doesn't it? Even marriages that start the way ours did. Charlie cleared his throat. I'll just check on the horses. When they were alone, Jonathan reached for Grace's hand. Come here. Sit with me. She perched carefully on the edge of the sofa. Up close, she could see how much the night had cost him. The lines of pain around his eyes, the pallor beneath his tan, the way his hand trembled slightly when it held hers. I've been thinking, he said. Lying here with nothing to do but think, actually. About this arrangement of ours. About what I promised you when we married. Grace's stomach dropped. Jonathan, if you're having second thoughts, I'm having all the thoughts. Every thought I swore I wouldn't have. He pulled her closer, his eyes intense. I told you I couldn't love again, that I wouldn't. But I was wrong, Grace. I was wrong about so many things. You were grieving. You still are. Yes, and maybe I always will be, in some way. Margaret was my first love, and losing her broke something in me I thought couldn't be fixed. Jonathan's thumb traced circles on her palm. But you came in with your stubborn pride and your fierce heart, and you didn't try to fix me. You just lived. You taught my boys and defended my home, and stood beside me without asking for anything in return. And somehow, without even trying, you made me want to be whole again. Grace's eyes filled with tears.
Jonathan,
Let me finish, please. He took a shaky breath. I don't know if what I feel for you is the same as what I felt for Margaret. It's different, stronger in some ways, quieter in others. But it's real, Grace. It's so real it terrifies me. And I need to know, is there any chance you could feel the same? Not today, not tomorrow, but someday? Grace thought about the past weeks, about teaching Eli and holding Caleb, and sitting on cold porches with this complicated, broken man, about throwing firebombs and dragging him bleeding from a gunfight, about choosing this family every single day, even when it was hard, even when it hurt.
I think, she said slowly, that I've been falling in love with you since the moment you let me into your house.
I just didn't know what to call it, because I'd never felt it before. With you, with the boys, with this life. It's not what I imagined love would be. It's messier and harder and more complicated. But it's also more real than anything I've ever known. Jonathan pulled her down to him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle and desperate all at once. Grace melted into it, her hand cupping his face, feeling the scratch of his beard and the warmth of his skin and the absolute rightness of this moment. When they broke apart, both breathless, Jonathan was smiling for the first time since she'd met him. Really smiling. "Marry me again," he said.
We're already married.
Not like this. Not cold and transactional in a judge's office with you wearing a dead woman's dress and ring. He brought her hand to his lips. Marry me properly, with the boys there and the whole town watching. Marry me because you choose me, not because you're desperate.
I am desperate, Grace said.
Desperately in love with you. Is that a yes?
That's a yes.
The sound of small feet on the stairs interrupted them. Caleb appeared, followed by Eli, both boys stopping short when they saw Grace and Jonathan together.
Pa!
Caleb ran forward, and Grace caught him before he could jump on Jonathan's wounded side.
Gentle, sweetheart. Your father is still healing. But he's okay?
Eli's voice was small, uncertain. I'm more than okay, Jonathan said. Come here, both of you. Grace settled Caleb carefully next to Jonathan, while Eli climbed up on his other side. The four of them sat together on the sofa, a tangle of arms and hope, and something that felt like family. I need to tell you boys something, Jonathan said. About Grace and me. Eli tensed.
Are you sending her away?
What? No, never. Jonathan looked at Grace, then back at his sons. I'm asking her to marry me. For real this time. Because I love her, and I want her to be part of this family forever.
But you're already married,
Eli said, confused. Technically, yes, but that was a marriage of necessity. This time, I want it to be a marriage of choice, of love. Jonathan's voice was thick with emotion. I want you boys to understand that Grace isn't here because she has to be. She's here because she wants to be. Because she loves you both, and she loves me, and she's choosing us. Caleb, not fully understanding, but picking up on the emotion, threw his arms around Grace's neck. My mama, he said firmly. Grace's breath hitched. She looked at Eli, waiting for his reaction. The boy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Caleb's right. You are our mama now. Not the same as our first mama, but different. Special. He took Grace's hand. I choose you too. That's when Grace completely broke down, crying so hard she couldn't speak. Jonathan pulled all three of them close, and they stayed like that until the tears turned to laughter, until Caleb was giggling and Eli was smiling, and Jonathan was holding his whole world in his arms. Over the next 2 weeks, as Jonathan healed, something shifted in the household. It was subtle,
but profound. The way Grace moved through the rooms now, not as a guest, but as a true mistress of the house. The way Jonathan watched her, his eyes following her movements with open affection instead of guarded distance. The way the boys ran to her first, with their joys and hurts, treating her exactly like the mother she'd become. Charlie spread the word about what Grace had done during the attack, and the town's attitude changed overnight. Women who'd snubbed her at the wedding now called on her, bringing gifts and apologies. Men tipped their hats with respect. The school teacher who'd replaced her came asking for advice on handling difficult students.
"They see you differently now," Rosa observed one afternoon while they were baking. "Because I threw bottles of fire at criminals?" Grace kneaded dough with practiced hands. "Because you fought for what was yours. Americans respect that, especially out here. You proved you belong." Rosa paused. "Also, you made Senior Hale smile again. The town had given up hope on that." Grace had noticed it too. The way Jonathan's face had softened. The way he laughed now at Eli's terrible jokes and sang nonsense songs to Caleb. The way he looked at her, like she'd hung the moon. On the night before their second wedding, Grace found him in his office, going over account books. He looked up when she entered, his smile immediate and warm. "Shouldn't you be resting?" she asked. "Shouldn't you be preparing for tomorrow?" "There's nothing to prepare. Rosa has everything handled." Grace moved to sit on the edge of his desk. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Jonathan admitted. "Last time I got married, I knew exactly what I was doing. This time, I have no idea." "That makes two of us." He stood carefully, still favoring his wounded side, and pulled her to her feet. "Dance with me." "There's no music." "Don't need it." Jonathan took her hand, placing his other on her waist, and began to sway slowly. "Margaret taught me this, how to dance without music. She said the music should come from inside, from the heart." They moved together in the lamplight, Grace's head on his shoulder, his arms strong around her. Outside, snow was falling again, blanketing the ranch in white. Inside, everything was warm and safe and right. "I never thought I'd be happy again," Jonathan murmured. "After Margaret died, I thought that was it. One chance at love, one chance at joy, and I'd lost it forever." "Maybe we get more than one chance," Grace said. "Maybe the heart is bigger than we think." "Maybe you're right." He kissed her hair. "Thank you, Grace, for everything. For saving my life, for loving my boys, for choosing us when you could have chosen anything else. Where else would I go? This is my home now. You're my home." They stood together in the quiet office, swaying to music only they could hear, and Grace felt something settle deep in her chest. This was it. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not the desperate passion of youth, but the steady, enduring warmth of two people who'd chosen each other through fire and fear, and finally found their way to peace. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon, with half the town in attendance. Grace wore a new dress, pale blue silk that Rosa had somehow acquired from God knows where, and a crown of winter berries in her hair. Eli stood beside Jonathan as best man, his chest puffed with pride. Caleb scattered flower petals with chaotic enthusiasm, making everyone laugh. When Grace walked down the makeshift aisle in the parlor, Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears this time, happy ones. Judge Whitmore performed the ceremony again, but this time, when he asked if they took each other, Grace and Jonathan answered together, their voices strong and sure. When Jonathan kissed her, Eli cheered and Caleb shouted, "Mama!" and the whole room erupted in applause. At the reception, people crowded around to congratulate them. The ranch hands raised toasts. Rosa cried into her apron. Charlie made a speech about how the boss had finally found someone stubborn enough to match him. Even the town council members who'd fired Grace months ago showed up to offer awkward apologies and best wishes. But the best moment came later, after the guests had left and the house had quieted. Grace was putting the boys to bed when Eli said, "This was better than the first wedding." "Why's that?" "Because this time Pa was smiling. And this time you looked happy instead of scared." Eli nestled into his blankets. "And this time it felt real." "It is real, sweetheart. As real as anything I've ever known." She kissed both boys goodnight and went to find her husband. Jonathan was on the porch, despite the cold, staring out at the land he'd built, the home he'd fought to protect. "Come inside," Grace said. "You'll freeze." "In a minute." He held out his hand. "Come watch the stars with me first." She joined him, wrapping herself in his warmth, and together they looked up at the vast Montana sky. Somewhere out there, the rustlers who'd attacked them were either dead or running. Somewhere out there, winter was raging. But here, in this moment, everything was still and perfect and theirs. "I have something for you," Jonathan said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I meant to give it to you at the ceremony, but I lost my nerve." Inside was a ring. Not Margaret's ring this time, but something new. A simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the starlight. "It's not much," he said, "but it's yours. Not a hand-me-down, not borrowed. Yours." Grace slipped off Margaret's ring and put on the new one. It fit perfectly. "It's everything," she whispered. Jonathan pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised tomorrow and forever, and all the days in between. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Grace Hale. More than I thought I could love anyone again. More than I have words for." "I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes." "Good. We'll be scared together," he smiled, "and brave together, and happy together, for as long as we both shall live." "Deal," Grace said, and kissed him again. Later, when they were finally alone in the room that was now truly theirs, Jonathan held her like she was precious, like she was everything. And for the first time in her life, Grace felt completely at home. Not because of the house, or the land, or the comfort, but because of this man, these boys, this family she'd found in the most unexpected way. She'd come to this ranch desperate and frozen, agreeing to a loveless marriage just to survive. And somehow, through pain and fear and choosing each other every single day, that loveless marriage had transformed into something beautiful, something worth fighting for, something worth living for. Grace fell asleep in Jonathan's arms, warm and safe and loved, and dreamed of spring coming to Montana, of flowers blooming in the snow, of second chances and new beginnings, and the extraordinary gift of being chosen. Spring came slowly to Montana that year, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and mud, and Grace stood at the kitchen window, watching Jonathan work with the hands in the south pasture, his movements still careful around his healing wound. "He pushes too hard," Rosa said, kneading bread beside her. "Always has. He won't listen to me when I tell him to rest." Grace turned from the window. "Says he's been resting for 2 months and the ranch won't run itself." "Then stop telling him. Make him." Rosa's eyes twinkled. "You are his wife now. You have ways." Grace laughed, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Marriage had changed things between them. Not just the legal status, but the intimacy, the partnership, the way they moved through each day as a unit, instead of 2 separate people trying to coexist. Some nights, she still woke up surprised to find Jonathan beside her, his arm draped over her waist, his breath warm on her neck. After so many years alone,
Being loved felt like a miracle she didn't quite deserve. "Mama!" Caleb came running in, his hands covered in something sticky. "Look, I helped Eli make a birdhouse." "Did you now?" Grace lifted him up despite the mess. "And what did you do exactly?" "I holded the nails." "Held the nails," Grace corrected gently. "And that's very helpful. Where's your brother?" "Outside, showing Pa."
Caleb squirmed down and ran back out, leaving sticky handprints on Grace's dress. Through the window, she watched Eli present the crude birdhouse to Jonathan with obvious pride. Jonathan examined it seriously, turning it over, nodding like he was inspecting fine craftsmanship. Then he pulled Eli into a hug, and the boy's face lit up with pure joy. 6 months ago, that boy never smiled, Rosa observed. Now look at him. It was true. Eli had transformed from the angry, grieving child Grace first met into a bright, curious boy who asked questions constantly and laughed easily. He still had hard days, they all did, but the walls he'd built around his heart were crumbling, piece by piece. That afternoon, Grace was in the middle of teaching Eli long division when Charlie appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands and his face troubled. "Mrs. Hale, there's someone here to see you. From back east." Grace's pencil froze mid-equation. "From Boston?" "Says his name is Thomas Whitfield. Claims to be your cousin." The room tilted. Grace gripped the table to steady herself. "Thomas is here? Now?" "Waiting in the parlor. Should I tell him you're not available?" "No, I'll—" Grace stood, her mind racing. "Eli, practice those problems. I'll be back shortly." Thomas Whitfield stood by the fireplace, looking completely out of place in his expensive Eastern suit and polished shoes. He was older than Grace remembered, 30 now, with the same dark hair and sharp features as her father, but without the kindness. He turned when she entered, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Grace, my dear cousin, I barely recognized you. Ranch life seems to suit you." "What are you doing here, Thomas?" "Is that any way to greet family? We haven't seen each other in what, 10 years?" He moved closer, and Grace forced herself not to step back. "I heard about your marriage. Quite the catch, this Jonathan Hale, one of the wealthiest ranchers in Montana, from what I understand. What do you want?" Thomas's smile faded. "Direct as ever. Fine, I'll be equally direct. Your father's estate was never properly settled. There were debts, Grace, significant debts that were transferred to you as his sole heir. My father died with nothing. Everything went to pay the funeral expenses, and that's what you thought. But there was a loan, a substantial loan from a Boston bank that your father took out 2 years before he died. It's been accruing interest, and the bank has decided to collect. From you." Grace's legs went weak. "How much?" $12,000. The number was impossible, astronomical. Grace sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "I don't have that kind of money. I don't have any money." "No, but your husband does." Thomas sat across from her, his expression calculating. "Marry a wealthy man, and suddenly all your problems disappear. Quite clever, actually." "I didn't marry Jonathan for his money." "Didn't you? A desperate woman, no prospects, facing debtor's prison? Then you conveniently marry one of the richest men in 3 counties. Thomas leaned forward. "I'm not judging, Grace. I'm offering you a solution. Pay the debt, and I'll make sure the bank never contacts you again. Refuse, and they'll come after you legally. They could seize assets, attach liens to this property, make life very difficult for your new family." "You bastard!" Grace's voice shook with rage. "You're trying to extort money from me." "I'm trying to help you settle a legitimate debt." Thomas stood, straightening his jacket. "Think about it. Talk to your husband. I'm staying at the hotel in town for 3 more days. After that, I return to Boston and the bank pursues legal action." He left, and Grace sat in the parlor feeling like the floor had dropped out from under her. $12,000. It might as well have been 12 million. Even if the debt was real, and she wasn't sure it was, she had no way to verify it, no way to fight it. And if Thomas went to the bank, if they really did come after the ranch, after Jonathan... "Grace?" Jonathan's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, concern written across his face. "Charlie said your cousin was here. What did he want?" Grace opened her mouth to lie, to protect him, to handle this herself. Then she remembered their vows, the real ones, the second ones. No more secrets, no more pretending. "He says my father owed money, a lot of money, and that the debt passed to me when he died." She told him everything, watching his expression darken with each word. When she finished, Jonathan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "This debt, did you know about it?" "No, my father never mentioned it. He was careful with money, Jonathan. He wouldn't have taken out a loan that size without telling me." "So Thomas could be lying." "Yes, or exaggerating, or—" Grace pressed her hands to her face. "I don't know, but if he's not, if this is real, I can't ask you to pay it. That's not fair. That's not right." Jonathan crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. "Grace, look at me." She did, tears streaming down her face. "You're my wife. What's mine is yours. If you have debts, they're our debts. If someone is threatening you, they're threatening us." His voice was steel. "We'll figure this out together." $12,000, Jonathan. That's nearly everything you have liquid. It could cripple the ranch. Or it could be complete nonsense designed to scare you. He stood, pulling her to her feet. "Tomorrow we go to town. We talk to a lawyer. We find out if this debt is even real, and if it is, we fight it. Together. And if we can't fight it? Then we pay it, and we rebuild." Jonathan cupped her face. "You're worth more than any amount of money, Grace. You and the boys, you're everything. The ranch is just land and cattle. You're my family." Grace threw her arms around him, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "I love you. God, I love you so much." "I love you too, and we're going to be fine." He kissed her hair. "But right now, you need to tell me everything you remember about your father's finances. Everything." They spent the evening going through Grace's memories, writing down dates and amounts and names. Rosa kept the boys occupied while Jonathan and Grace worked, piecing together a picture of her father's final years. By midnight, they had a timeline that suggested Thomas was lying, or at least severely exaggerating. "Your father sold the house 6 months before he died," Jonathan said, studying their notes. "The sale price was $3,000. If he had a $12,000 loan, why not pay it down then?" "Maybe he did. Maybe this is what's left after that payment." "Or maybe there never was a loan." Jonathan's jaw was set. "Tomorrow we find out." The lawyer, a shrewd man named Henderson, listened to their story with increasing interest. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "I can telegraph Boston, verify if such a debt exists. But Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, this sounds like a confidence scheme to me. The timing is too convenient, the amount too precise, the pressure too urgent." Henderson pulled out paper and pen. "Let me ask you this. What exactly did your cousin say would happen if you didn't pay?" Grace recounted the conversation, and Henderson's eyes narrowed. "He used the phrase, 'Make sure the bank never contacts you again'?"
Not settled a debt or clear your father's name? Yes. Why? Because that's extortion language, not debt collection language. Henderson wrote rapidly. I think your cousin found out about your marriage, saw an opportunity, and fabricated this debt to extract money from your wealthy husband. It's not uncommon.
Can you prove it? Jonathan asked. I can try. Give me 2 days. Henderson looked at Grace kindly. Mrs. Hale, do you have any documents from your father's estate? Anything showing his debts were settled?
No, I was 14 when he died. The court appointed someone to handle everything, and I was told there was nothing left. I don't even know who the executor was.
That's fine. I'll start there. Henderson stood. In the meantime, don't give your cousin a single cent. If he presses you, refer him to me. And Mr. Hale, keep your wife close. Men like Thomas Whitfield don't give up easily. They returned to the ranch to find chaos. Eli was crying in the kitchen while Rosa tried to calm him, and Caleb was nowhere to be seen.
What happened?
Grace rushed to Eli.
Where's Caleb? He was playing by the creek, and I told him not to go too close, but he didn't listen, and then I heard him scream, and when I got there, he was in the water.
Eli was nearly hysterical.
Charlie pulled him out, but he's not waking up, Mama. He's not waking up.
Grace's heart stopped. She ran toward the boy's bedroom where Charlie had taken Caleb, Jonathan right behind her. The little boy lay on the bed, soaking wet, his lips blue, his body terrifyingly still.
He fell on the deep part,
Charlie said, his voice shaking.
Must have hit his head on a rock. I got him out quick as I could, but...
Grace didn't wait to hear more. She tilted Caleb's head back, checked his mouth for obstructions, and began pressing on his chest the way the doctor had once shown her. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe.
Come on, baby, she whispered between compressions. Come on, stay with me.
Jonathan stood frozen, his face white as death. Eli had followed them in and was sobbing in the corner. Rosa was praying in Spanish. And Grace kept pressing, kept breathing, kept fighting for this child she'd come to love as her own.
Please, she begged. Please, Caleb, please.
The boy suddenly convulsed, water spewing from his mouth. Grace rolled him onto his side as he coughed and gasped, his eyes flying open in panic and confusion.
Mama!
His voice was a croak.
I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here.
Grace gathered him close, not caring that he was soaking her through.
You're okay. You're going to be okay.
Jonathan collapsed onto the bed beside them, pulling both Grace and Caleb into his arms.
Jesus Christ, he breathed. Jesus Christ, I thought...
He's all right, Grace said, though she was shaking so hard she could barely get the words out.
He's all right.
Eli crept closer, tears streaming down his face.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have watched him better.
Come here, Grace said, holding out an arm. Eli dove into the embrace, and suddenly all 4 of them were on the bed, holding each other, crying and laughing and thanking God. Later, after Caleb was warm and dry and sleeping peacefully, after Eli had finally stopped apologizing, Grace found Jonathan standing outside the boy's bedroom, his back against the wall, his face in his hands.
Jonathan?
I froze, he said, his voice broken. When I saw him lying there, I froze. If you hadn't known what to do, if you hadn't acted so fast... He couldn't finish. Grace took his hands.
But I did, and he's fine.
I lost Margaret. I almost lost him. I can't... Jonathan's voice cracked. I can't lose anyone else, Grace. I can't survive it. You won't have to. I'm not going anywhere. She pulled him close. We're all staying right here. Together. They stood in the hallway holding each other, while their children slept safely just a few feet away. And Grace understood something profound. This family, this messy, complicated,
hard-won family was worth any price. Worth fighting Thomas, worth facing debts, worth drowning in fear and coming up gasping.
Because they'd chosen each other, and that choice meant everything. 2 days later, Henderson sent word. The debt was a fraud. Thomas had forged documents using a real Boston bank's letterhead, but there was no loan, no legal obligation. Henderson had already contacted the sheriff, and Thomas Whitfield was arrested at the hotel trying to board a stage out of town. He'll face charges, Henderson told them in his office. Fraud, attempted extortion. He'll be lucky if he only gets 5 years. Grace should have felt triumph. Instead, she just felt tired. He was my only living relative. He was a criminal, Jonathan said firmly, and you're better off without him. That night, Grace found Eli in his room, working on a new project, a drawing of their family. All 4 of them together, holding hands, with the ranch house behind them and the mountains in the distance. "This is beautiful," Grace said, sitting beside him. "It's for you, for Mother's Day next month." Eli looked up at her shyly. "Is it okay if I call you Mama now? Not just when I'm scared, but all the time?" Grace's throat tightened. "More than okay. I'd love that." "Good, because you are my mama. Not the one who gave birth to me, but the one who chose to love me. Rosa says that's even better." "Rosa's a wise woman." Eli went back to his drawing, adding details with careful precision. "Were you scared today, when Caleb almost died?" "Terrified." "But you didn't freeze. You saved him." Eli's voice was full of admiration. "Pa said he froze, but you didn't. You're the bravest person I know." Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, remember? It means you're scared and you act anyway. "Like when you married Pa, even though you didn't love him yet?" Grace smiled. "Exactly like that." "And now you do love him, and he loves you, and we're a real family." Eli added flowers to the drawing. "I think my first mama would be happy about that. Rosa says she's watching from heaven, and she's glad we have you. I think she'd be very proud of you and Caleb. You're both amazing boys." "We had a good teacher," Eli grinned at her. "The best teacher." That Sunday, the whole family went to church together for the first time. Grace wore her best dress, Jonathan his good suit, and the boys were scrubbed until they shone. People stared as they walked down the aisle, not with judgment now, but with respect. The school teacher who'd been cast out had become the rancher's wife who'd defended her home with fire and saved her family with love. After the service, women clustered around Grace, asking for her opinion on everything from child rearing to defending property. Men clapped Jonathan on the shoulder, congratulating him on his recovery and his choice of wife. The boys ran off to play with other children, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, Grace felt truly accepted. "Quite a change from your first visit to town," Henderson observed, joining them on the church steps. "People remember who you are when times get hard," Jonathan said. Grace proved herself. More than that, she proved that second chances are real, that people can choose new lives. Henderson tipped his hat. That's a powerful thing in a place like this, where everyone's running from something. On the ride home, with the boys dozing in the back of the wagon, Jonathan reached for Grace's hand. Happy? Deliriously. And it was true. Despite Thomas's attempted fraud, despite Caleb's near drowning, despite all the challenges and fears, Grace was happy. Bone deep, soul-satisfied happy in a way she'd never imagined possible. Summer arrived with a vengeance, bringing heat and hard work and long days. Grace taught the boys in the mornings and worked alongside Rosa in the afternoons, learning to can vegetables and smoke meat
and manage a household the size of a small village.
Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned, her body stronger. She was nothing like the refined Boston school teacher she'd been. She was something better, a Montana rancher's wife, a mother, a partner. On their 6-month anniversary, Jonathan gave her a horse. Her name's Lady, and she's yours. Time you learn to ride properly. Grace, who'd never been on a horse in her life, stared at the beautiful chestnut mare.
Jonathan, I can't.
You can, and you will. Can't be a rancher's wife if you can't ride. He helped her into the saddle, his hands steady on her waist. I'll teach you, just like I taught you everything else.
You didn't teach me everything,
Grace said, trying not to panic as the horse shifted beneath her.
I taught myself how to throw firebombs.
Jonathan laughed, the sound rich and free. Fair point. Hold the reins like this. That's it. Now just relax and let her feel you're confident.
I'm not confident. I'm terrified.
Then fake it. That's what confidence is. Being scared and acting like you're not. By the end of summer, Grace could ride well enough to accompany Jonathan on short trips around the property. They'd ride out to check fences or inspect cattle. Caleb on Jonathan's saddle and Eli on his own small pony. And Grace would look at this life she'd built and marvel at how far she'd come. One evening in late August, as the sun set over the mountains painting everything gold and purple, Jonathan pulled his horse alongside hers. I have something to tell you.
Should I be worried?
No, it's good news. He reached across the distance between their horses and took her hand. The ranch is doing better than it has in 5 years. We're expanding the herd, buying more land. Charlie thinks we could double our profits by next year.
That's wonderful.
It is, but the best part is knowing I'm building something that will last. Something I can pass to our sons, and maybe... He paused.
Maybe to other children, if we're blessed.
Grace's breath caught. They'd never discussed more children, had both been so focused on healing the family they had. You'd want that? More children?
With you, I'd want a dozen.
Jonathan's eyes were warm.
But I'll take whatever we're given, 1 more, or none, or 10, as long as I have you.
That night, lying in bed with Jonathan's arm around her and the sounds of the ranch settling for sleep, Grace thought about the girl she'd been less than a year ago. Desperate, frozen, willing to marry a stranger just to survive. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd fought for her family, loved fiercely, chosen courage over comfort, and built something real from the ashes of desperation. What are you thinking about? Jonathan murmured against her hair.
How far we've come. How different everything is.
Regrets?
Not a single one.
Grace turned in his arms to face him.
You?
Only that I didn't see what you were sooner. That I wasted months treating you like an arrangement when you were always meant to be my partner. He kissed her softly. But we have the rest of our lives to make up for it.
The rest of our lives, Grace repeated. I like the sound of that.
They fell asleep wrapped around each other, safe and loved and home. The years that followed brought challenges, droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, the endless work of running a ranch. But they faced it all together, Grace and Jonathan and their boys, building something that would last generations. Eli grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books as much as horses, eventually taking over much of the ranch's business operations. Caleb became a skilled rider and cattleman, his mother's bravery and his father's strength combined in one fearless spirit. And Grace. Grace became the heart of not just her family, but the entire community. She started a school on the ranch, teaching children from neighboring properties. She organized the women to help families in need. She proved that a woman could be both gentle and fierce, educated and practical, Eastern-born and Western-made. On their 10th anniversary, Jonathan took her back to the place where Charlie had found her that frozen winter night. "This is where it started," he said, "where you came into my life and changed everything." Grace looked at the road, remembering that desperate girl.
I was so scared.
"You were magnificent. You still are." Jonathan pulled her close. "Thank you for not giving up, for choosing us, for loving us even when we didn't deserve it."
You always deserved it. You just had to learn how to accept it.
They stood together, watching the sun set over the land they'd built together, and Grace knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every fear, every moment of doubt had been worth it. She'd come to Montana seeking shelter and found a home. She'd married for survival and discovered love. She'd agreed to mother 2 boys and gained a family that filled her heart to overflowing. This was her life now, not the one she'd planned, but the one she'd chosen. And it was more beautiful, more real, more perfectly imperfect than any dream she could have imagined. Grace Whitfield. Hale had found exactly where she belonged, and she was never letting go.